From online battles to downloadable content, online gaming is nowadays a mainstay on any and all platforms of gaming, and one is hard-pressed to imagine it not being there nowadays. Outside of the PC market, console online gaming was popularized with the Dreamcast, with games such as Phantasy Star Online, and grown much further with services such as Xbox Live shortly after. However, online gaming in the console market had several prior attempts, and one just around the time of being popularized was happening in Japan on none other than the Game Boy Color and soon the Game Boy Advance. This was a service called the Mobile System GB that launched in 2001 and supported a handful of games across both platforms that had one plug their Game Boy device to a cell phone using a special cable to bring online for various tasks from trades, online battles, and even DLC. However, what games supported it, and in what ways, and why did it stay exclusive to Japan? Today on Gaming History, we will look at the Japan-only online functionality of the Game Boy. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell too to further support us and keep creating new videos. Chapter 1. Exploring online gaming. During the late 90s, Nintendo was hard at work on the exploration of online services. Having already dabbled in online gaming prior with consoles such as the Super Famicom's Satellaview service, the Nintendo 64's 64 disk drive was the major focus of an online service for the Nintendo 64 that provided everything from downloadable content to simply exploring the web while on the N64. However, at the same time, Nintendo wasn't just looking at their home console for online gaming, but also their very successful handheld market too, that had a massive install base. As with all of Nintendo's previous attempts at building an online service, they teamed up with an outside company. In this case, it was with the gaming giant Konami to make a jointly owned company called Mobile 21 in order to operate the online service for the handheld. Seeing that this was the year 2000, the Game Boy was on its last leg, as the Game Boy Advance was coming out, and the idea was to make this a service that could function across both platforms. And so the Nintendo Space World event rolled around in late August 2000. Where a plethora of new games were shown off, including not just the Game Boy Advance and Pokémon Crystal, but also this new online functionality for the Game Boy Color and the newly announced Game Boy Advance, called the Mobile System GB. Showing off the design of the cable that you'd link between the Game Boy and the cell phone, as well as being announced to launch on the same day as Pokémon Crystal, is then known killer app. However, while it was going to be released on the same day, that date for the Mobile System GB was pushed up a little over a month from December 14th, 2000 to January 27th, 2001. With the launch came 3 models, with each model supporting different cell phones in Japan and color-coded to yellow, blue, and red to tell them apart. The blue one in this case covered at least 90% of the Japanese mobile market, as those targeted the ever-popular PDC phones of the era, and this launched for 5,800 yen or $48 US. To top this off, it had a service fee of 400 yen or $4 US to register your system with, and at a 10 yen or 10 cents US fee per minute of use in Japan. The fees would be charged to the mobile carrier, which the bill would likely come to one's parents at the time, who would be paying for the cell phone service they let their child use. It came with a 15-day trial and even had some restrictions in case a child spent over 10,000 yen being online to stop letting them use the service for the remainder of the month. A lot of nickel and diming to start, but to some, this was revolutionary with what was to come. Chapter 2. Pokémon Online. Being that this was an online service, a number of games were being planned to take advantage of this, 30 at least in the planning, the most anticipated one being Pokémon Crystal. Pokémon in this era was definitely still hot within the era of Poké Fever, and what game is better to promote your online service, especially when the 64 disk drive had failed at that. It was time to launch a proper game with this service. While it took a month after its launch, Pokémon Crystal soon was able to go online. To go about going online, it wasn't from any sort of menu on the title screen like with many games, but rather going to a special Pokemon Center within Goldenrod City in the game that replaced the Pokemon Center from Gold and Silver's version. This went by a new name called the Pokemon Communication Center. Upon entry, you would have the usual Pokemon Center desk to heal your Pokemon, but once you go to the right, you can see that it is absolutely massive. Let alone this had a much grander version of the usual Pokemon Center theme that can be heard here. Now while you have your Game Boy plugged with the online adapter and plugged into a cell phone, you could talk to a special nurse on the right to access the online capabilities. This opened doors to not only play mini games, but also trade and battle with people across the nation. A dream that many Pokemon fans had at that time really, though this was a 10 yen a trade. But not just that, there was also a new Battle Tower mode that was being introduced into Crystal, whereby when you visit the Battle Tower building while connected online, the doors would open up and you can face people from across Japan 5 times a day with 3 Pokemon. Top this with how it kept track of the ranking of players here too. One of the more underlooked features was the Pokemon News Network that one could register to in the game at 100 yen a month. While it was neat that it would give you updates on your progress throughout the game, it also gave a number of downloadable content with it. This included receiving a Pokemon egg that could hatch into one of the many baby Pokemon with a 50% rate of coming out shiny even. This was apparently done by receiving an egg ticket from the daycare man to redeem at the communication center while online. A lesser piece of DLC was receiving a new mail background called Mirage Mail for the in-game attachable mail items, but the big prize was the GS Ball. Many know the GS Ball from the Pokemon anime, where Ash received it way back in the Orange Islands and kinda was forgotten about after being delivered to Kurt. So what better way of finally delivering on that hype than offering it as a piece of DLC? When you have all 16 badges, beat a minigame, and complete the quiz that the attendant of the communication tower would give you, you'd receive the GS Ball. Much like the anime, you could take that to Kurt and come back to him 24 hours later. He'll have you follow him outside once bringing up the strange presence within the ball and has you go to the Ilex forest. With the rustling trees around, one can then take the GS Ball and put it inside the shrine. Out comes a level 30 Celebi to challenge you to a battle. At the time, this was the only legitimate way to get a Celebi. The last feature that came with it was an obscure one that at 20 yen per use, one could download data of official Pokemon tournaments that would then be saved onto one's cartridge. Then one could plug their cartridge into an N64 transfer pack and then into a Japanese version of Pokemon Stadium 2 and watch these matches in full 3D. Chapter 3, Beyond Pokemon, the other online games. While Pokemon clearly was the killer app to gauge any interest in this, another 29 games were planned for it actually. While data on many of these aren't too easy to attain, it still exists in many prominent ones. The next most popular one in this case being Mario Kart Advance, or Mario Kart Super Circuit. Yes, a Game Boy Advance game in this case. Released in summer 2001, it was yet another first-party game to use this online feature. Now, unlike Pokémon Crystal, this was nowhere near as robust. In the main menu, there is a third option called Mobile that one can enter. This lets one enter one's login information, Ghost Data, access world rankings, and access mobile GP mode. Ghost Data being the most prominent feature here. This would allow one to download up to 2 Ghost Data of players. For those who don't know, Ghost Data is data of a player that is collected with the best time on a specific course that you could race against and see if you could outperform them. In relation to that, there was also the world rankings section that lets you see the ones with the highest records in the Ghost Data that you could download. And then there is mobile GP mode, where one could be pitted against the best times of others throughout Japan. As well, another prominent game was Game Boy Wars 3, the predecessor to the Advance War games many of you know of. This used a feature in the game called the WarNet Center that can be accessed via the communication tower in the game to go online. From there, one is able to receive messages from the center, receive special medals that can enhance units, download new units altogether, and on top of that, download new maps designed by gaming magazine editors. Now, considering the company running this online service was jointly owned between Nintendo and Konami, a Konami game having this feature was a no-brainer. But the game to receive it was surprisingly a Game Boy Advance Silent Hill game called Play Novel Silent Hill, exclusively in Japan. This was, as the title suggests, a visual novel based on the first Silent Hill game, using images and low-res FMVs from the original game. The online service of this offered new scenarios to add upon the original story of the game. This was broken into 4 DLC segments, covering one for each season at 20 yen apiece. The downside to this was that it couldn't be saved onto the cartridge itself, and rather would be held by the GBA's RAM. So as soon as one shuts it off, it was gone. So one must play it as soon as they grab it, and yes, you would have to repurchase it again, in other words. Now, one part I neglected to mention was that every adapter was packed in with a Game Boy Color cartridge called Mobile Trainer. This wasn't so much a game, but rather was a full-on online access cart to send and receive emails, keep a contact list of 6 people, receive mail related to Mobile System GB, Nintendo-approved websites, seeing what new content was coming, and editing your account. Now, websites you were approved to view was done as a measure to keep it kid-friendly, along with a mobile-specific website to visit for information. It was even possible to download a website in order to view it offline. All of this while there was a counter at the bottom showing you how long you've been online, as you were being charged for just being online here. Now, Mobile Golf, which is a game similar to Mario Golf, considering it was made by the same developer, also featured online capabilities here too. This included new courses for 50 yen apiece, mini games at 10 yen, and new characters including Mario, Yoshi, Peach, and Foreman Spike even from Wrecking Crew at 10 yen. On top of that, tournaments were also held online for 3 months at 50 yen a round. Now, there were many other games of much less prominence too. These include Napoleon, which came with a trial mode and 3 weekly maps to download for 30 yen, as well as Hello Kitty Happy House, which let one do basic email and share different furnitures as presents. Otherwise, the rest of the games aren't too easy to attain with how obscure many of these titles were, but this is an overall list of the remaining 21 games released. However, there were more with adapter GB support and development, 8 games in fact, that eventually cancelled support for online. These include 2 completely cancelled games such as Beatmania GB Net Jam and Horse Racing Trading Derby, but as well 5 released games including the ever popular Golden Sun, Kuru Kuru Kururin, Yu-Gi-Oh! Eternal Duelist Soul, game that made too much sense to have online, and the Legend of Zelda Oracle games, which at the time were 3 games rather than 2. The Oracle games in this case might have even used the online service instead of the game's password system if this had went through. Now the question is, why did these games not have online support despite making a lot of sense to have them? It's because the service came to an abrupt end. Chapter 4: The Swift Death. After just a little over a year's support, Nintendo announced on May 2002 that they would be ending the Mobile System GB service on December 14th, 2002. This would be the ultimate end for all online activity, from online multiplayer to downloadable content. Despite some mega hitters being there from Pokemon to Mario, the service just didn't catch on, and there were a lot of reasons as to why that might have happened. It was a tool marketed towards children and required them to use cell phones. While in Japan it wasn't too unusual for a child to have a cell phone, it was still another piece of hardware that was required, and in addition to that, one had to go through the whole process of registering and setting up. A rather complicated setup for a child, really. In fact, this complexity may very well be the reason why it never went beyond Japan. Cell phones, while they were in adult hands in the West, they still weren't anywhere near as common as they were in Japan, let alone a child having their own. Back then, I myself, seeing the setup in an issue of a gaming magazine, had an entire plan just to use my father's phone to do all this, which in retrospect may have led to a plethora of other problems in the form of costs. The costs themselves in this case being another major factor. It was a heavy amount of nickel and diming. While many are at this point begrudgingly used to the nickel and diming of online functionalities of modern gaming, it wasn't something normal back then. Not only would the game service charge you for a number of the features used, but you also would get charged by your cell phone provider for using the internet. This could add up real fast. In fact, you might have noticed throughout this video that when I mentioned the mobile sections of Mario Kart, the existence of the Pokemon Communication Center, plus the requirement of being online to even use the Battle Tower, as being something you never seen in your own Western copies of the game. And the reason is simple: this service was never planned for the West. And so the features were entirely scrapped when bringing these games over for the West, which unfortunately for many Pokémon Crystal fans meant that Celebi was inaccessible legally. But by keeping it Japan exclusive, this kept the market also very small, And so, upon the shutdown of the service on December 14, 2002, the joint corporation between Nintendo and Konami, called Mobile 21, was officially dissolved. Epilogue: The Uncertain Future. Mobile System GB was yet another failure for Nintendo in exploring the online market after just facing another major failure in the form of the Nintendo 64 disk drive, back to back. It has never been confirmed, but many theorize that both failures might have potentially even led Nintendo to backpedal on their attempts to put an online landscape for the GameCube, which definitely had plans for online gaming at one point, but severely slowed down shortly after, with only ever having a few online games at all. A move that would haunt Nintendo for the next few years, as they became the one company that wished to stay offline for the time being. Hey everyone, thank you for watching! Subscribe for more gaming history videos, and hit the like button and comment below on if you would have liked this to have been localized. So everyone, thank you for watching!